Ready for a toast? Today we're going to be exploring Ninkasi, the Mesopotamian goddess of beer and brewing. We've got some really intriguing excerpts about her. I'm really eager to share them with you. This exploration is going to go beyond just the history of beer. It's about how ancient cultures viewed it, the stories they wove around it, and who knows, maybe we'll even pick up some ancient brewing tips along the way.
It is really fascinating how something like beer, we drink it all the time, but it can be so deeply intertwined with a culture's mythology, everyday life, and even technological advancements.
Absolutely. So let's get to know Ninkasi. Her name translates to, as you might have guessed, mistress of beer. Pretty on the nose, right?
Yeah, it's not very subtle.
What more can you tell us about her?
Well, her name certainly makes her connection to beer very clear, but she wasn't just the symbol of the drink itself. Ninkasi represented the entire brewing process, the enjoyment of beer, its social aspects, and even the potential consequences of overindulgence. She truly embodies beer's significance in Mesopotamian life.
I am already intrigued. And speaking of names, I came across another one. Kurunutu. Is this another name for Ninkasi?
That's a great observation. Kurunutu might have been a name used later for Ninkasi, or perhaps it referred to a specific type of high-quality beer. It's similar to how today we have countless craft beer terms and categories. Everyone's on a quest for that perfect brew, just like the ancient Mesopotamians were.
So the pursuit of the perfect beer is a tale as old as time.
Yes.
I love it. You mentioned Ninkasi represented more than just serving beer. And I have to admit, I was picturing her as this divine barmaid pouring pints in some celestial pub.
That's funny. While she eyes the goddess of beer, scholars don't necessarily view her as a literal barmaid.
Okay.
Think of her as symbolizing the process of brewing, from grain to that glorious final product,
Okay.
and the broader impact beer had on Mesopotamian society.
Okay, that makes sense. So every time someone enjoyed a beer, they were essentially honoring Ninkasi.
In a way, yes. Their enjoyment was a testament to how deeply beer was woven into their daily lives and spiritual beliefs. Now, let's talk about her place among the other gods and goddesses. Who were her divine relatives?
I was just about to ask that. Spill the celestial tea.
Well, get this. Her parents were Enki and Ninti, incredibly powerful deities.
Wow.
Enki was associated with wisdom, fresh water, and creation, while Ninti was a healing goddess. So having these two as parents automatically elevates Ninkasi's status in the Mesopotamian pantheon.
Wow, talk about a divine pedigree. Brewing was a pretty high-class profession.
Yeah.
Divinely ordained, no less. But hold on, there's more to this family tree, right? Something about Ninhursag raising her.
You are absolutely right, and this is where it gets really interesting. Ninhursag, another prominent goddess often associated with creation and nurturing, is said to have raised Ninkasi even though she wasn't her biological mother. The reasons behind this are still unclear, but it adds another layer of intrigue to Ninkasi's story.
It seems like Mesopotamian deities had their share of complicated family dynamics. Were there other beer-related gods or goddesses?
Interestingly, there was another goddess associated with beer, Sirash, sometimes spelled Cirrus. And their relationship is a bit of a scholarly puzzle.
Oh?
Sometimes they're considered the same goddess, sometimes sisters, and there are even hints that they might have been seen as spouses in certain traditions.
Wow, talk about a divine power couple.
Yeah.
Okay, so things get a little murky when it comes to these godly family ties. What about children? Did Ninkasi have any little brewers of her own?
She did, and their names are quite revealing, especially when you consider them from a modern perspective.
Okay.
It's like a timeline of a memorable night out with friends. We have Meyu, meaning glowing me, Meku, possibly meaning beautiful me, Emamite, which could be ornate speech, Ketushurizal, meaning magnificent seat, and my personal favorite, Nujiliga, translating to not drying up.
Those names are incredible. I can definitely relate to that not drying up feeling after a good beer or two. Speaking of locations, with a goddess as important as Ninkasi, you'd think she'd have her own city, right? Ninkasiville, with beer fountains and endless celebrations.
You raise a good point. While Ninkasi was worshipped across Mesopotamia, there's no evidence of a city dedicated solely to her.
Really? No Ninkasiville. So where did people go to honor her?
We know she was venerated in places like Shuruppak, Eridu, Umma, and importantly, Nippur, where her name even appears on offering lists.
Okay.
These were ancient inventories of gifts given to the gods, so her presence there signifies her importance. Additionally, there's this incredible hymn to Ninkasi, which actually mentions a city. However, scholars believe this is more poetic than literal, suggesting that any place where beer is enjoyed is Ninkasi's domain.
I like that. A very inclusive approach to worship. Now, this hymn to Ninkasi, it sounds like more than just a song praising her.
You're picking up on something important. It's often interpreted as a poetic recipe for ancient Mesopotamian beer.
No way. Are we talking like step-by-step instructions, like take 2 handfuls of barley, sprinkle in a pinch of magic, and stir clockwise under a full moon?
Well, perhaps not quite that specific, but it offers some fascinating clues. The key ingredient mentioned is bapir, believed to be a type of bread, perhaps dried and hardened like biscotti.
Interesting. So beer bread, I've heard of that. But there's a bit of a twist, right? Something about recent research challenging this traditional view of the hymn.
Exactly. Recent studies have questioned whether the hymn to Ninkasi is actually a straightforward recipe.
Oh,
Some scholars suggest that bapir might refer to something else entirely, perhaps sourdough. There's a lot of debate in academic circles about this.
the mysteries of ancient beer brewing. This is why I love these explorations. They always bring up these surprising twists and turns. So tell me, does Ninkasi make any appearances in other Mesopotamian myths?
She does indeed. We catch glimpses of her in stories like Lugalbanda in the Onzid Bird and Lugalbanda in the Mountain Cave.
What kind of role does she play in these stories? Is she saving the day with her brewing prowess?
Not in the literal sense. In both of these myths, she's more of a symbolic presence.
Okay.
Her actions, or even the objects associated with her, like descriptions of her brewing vat being made of luxurious lapis lazuli,
Oh, wow.
represent the qualities of beer itself.
I see. So she's like the original beer influencer, subtly promoting the good stuff, even in mythology.
Precisely. It highlights the power of symbolism and how ancient cultures wove deeper meanings into these narratives.
This is remarkable. I'm blown away by how a seemingly simple beverage like beer can open a window into ancient culture, religious beliefs, and even brewing techniques.
I completely agree. Ninkasi is a perfect example of how ancient civilizations intertwine their practical knowledge with their mythology and belief systems. It really highlights how something we often take for granted, like you said, can have such deep roots and cultural significance.
It makes you want to raise a glass to those ancient brewers and their goddess Ninkasi, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Speaking of those ancient brewers, can you paint a picture of what the actual brewing process looked like back then in Mesopotamia?
So, based on archaeological findings and texts like the hymn to Ninkasi, it seems brewing involved multiple steps,
Okay.
much like it does today.
Yeah.
It started with malting barley, grinding it into flour, then mixing that with water and allowing it to ferment.
Yeah.
And there's evidence they even had a filtering system to remove any impurities.
Wow, that's pretty advanced for their time. Did they have any special equipment?
They did. They used large ceramic vessels for fermentation and had various tools for grinding and filtering.
Wow.
Some researchers even suggest they might have used a type of oven for drying the bepir, that bread-like ingredient we discussed earlier. It's really fascinating to imagine them working with these tools, carefully crafting their brews.
So were they essentially like the ancient equivalent of home brewers, just on a much grander scale?
That's a great comparison. And just like today, there were likely variations in their recipes and techniques,
Okay.
depending on the region and the individual brewer's preferences. It's exciting to think about the diversity of beers that might have existed back then.
I'm trying to picture what one of those ancient brews would taste like. It's incredible to think that something we still enjoy today has such a long and rich history.
Absolutely. And that connection to the past, that thread running through time, makes each sip even more special, don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. So we've talked about Ninkasi's family, her role in society, and even ancient brewing practices. But what about her personality? What kind of goddess was she?
Unfortunately, the sources don't offer a detailed portrait of Ninkasi's specific character traits.
Okay.
It's important to remember that Mesopotamian deities were complex beings with multiple facets.
Okay.
They weren't always strictly good or bad,
Right.
and their personalities often reflected the complexities of life itself.
So could Ninkasi have been a bit of a party goddess while also having a more serious side?
Beer itself embodies that duality. It's associated with celebration and good times,
Right.
but can also lead to trouble if not consumed responsibly.
Um,
Ninkasi, as the goddess of beer, likely embodied that same range of emotions and characteristics.
that makes a lot of sense. She's like the original patron of everything in moderation.
I like that way of putting it. It's a perspective that resonates across cultures and time periods.
And it brings us back to those intriguing names of her children. It's like each one captures a different stage of a night out, from glowing me to not drying up. It's almost like Ninkasi's giving us a little wink from across the millennia.
I love that image. It shows how these ancient stories can still resonate with us today, connecting us to those who came before and their experiences, even if they were vastly different from our own.
It really does make you wonder what Ninkasi would think of the craft beer movement today.
If Ninkasi were a modern-day brewer, what kind of signature beer do you think she would create?
Hmm, that's a tough one. Given her connection to nature and the abundance of the earth, I think she'd probably be all about sustainability
Oh, yeah.
and using locally sourced ingredients. I can imagine her brewing something with Mesopotamian dates and spices, or maybe putting a unique spin on a barley wine using those traditional fermentation methods we talked about earlier.
I love those ideas. She might even try to recreate some of those ancient recipes, perhaps using modern equipment,
Yeah.
to get a sense of how those flavors would translate to today's palates.
I would be first in line to try Ninkasi's ancient brew. It would be like taking a sit back in time.
Yeah.
Makes you realize that even though we're separated by thousands of years, we share this common thread with those ancient Mesopotamians, our love of beer.
That's such a beautiful way to put it.
This has been an incredible journey. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for beer, its history, and the fascinating goddess who embodies it all.
Me too. It's amazing what we can learn about ancient cultures through something as seemingly simple as beer.
Before we finish, any final thoughts about Ninkasi's legacy and how it resonates with us today?
I think it reminds us that even the most familiar things have fascinating backstories and cultural importance. It encourages us to be curious and appreciate how those connections between the past and the present enrich our lives.
Well said. I'm raising a glass to Ninkasi, the ancient goddess of beer, and to all the brewers who keep that tradition alive, from those ancient Mesopotamians to the craft brewers of today.
To Ninkasi!
Yeah.
And to everyone listening, may your beers be cold, your knowledge flowing, and your curiosity always leading you to new discoveries. Cheers.
Cheers.